She thought she was building a home, but she was building a prison. And by the time she realized it, there was no way out. This is not just a story of murder, this is a story of a system that let it happen. The air in Pitalito, Colombia, often carried the sweet scent of coffee blossoms, a fragrance that spoke of life and new beginnings. Nestled amongst the verdant hills, the small town seemed to hum with a quiet rhythm, a place where neighbors knew each other's names and the days unfolded with a predictable gentleness. But beneath this tranquil veneer, like unseen currents in a seemingly placid stream, lay undercurrents of human emotion, capable of turning even the most promising landscapes into scenes of unforeseen tragedy. It was within this town, where the sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets in the late afternoons, that a love story began to weave its intricate and ultimately fatal tapestry. Elara, a young woman whose laughter echoed like the chirping of the local birds, possessed a spirit as bright as the tropical flowers that bloomed in abundance around Pitalito. Dreams danced in her eyes, visions of a future filled with warmth and shared joy. And then there was Mateo. To the casual observer, he was everything Elara could have wished for, a strong presence, a man who spoke of a shared life and the promise of a family. In him, Elara believed she had found not only a partner but the architect of her envisioned happiness, the father of the children she longed for. Their courtship blossomed quickly, fueled by the heady rush of new affection. They strolled hand in hand through the town square, their whispers mingling with the murmur of daily life. Plans for a future together were made under the starlit Colombian skies, hopes as boundless as the horizon. Yet, even in those early days, a subtle disquiet began to stir, a faint tremor beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect union. It manifested in small ways, almost imperceptible at first, like a shadow flickering at the edge of one's vision. A possessive glance lingering a moment too long, a seemingly innocuous question that carried a weight of suspicion. One sunny afternoon, as they walked through the bustling marketplace, Elara's radiant smile greeted a childhood friend with a light kiss on the cheek, a customary gesture of warmth in their culture. But in Mateo's eyes, this simple act ignited a spark of something dark and volatile. The easy camaraderie between the two women twisted into a perceived slight, a betrayal in his own possessive narrative. His reaction was swift and unsettling. Words, sharp and accusatory, flew like poisoned darts, not at Elara, but at her startled friend. The casual greeting became a flashpoint, revealing a side of Mateo that Elara had not yet fully comprehended, a glimpse into the possessive depths that lay within him. This initial display of jealousy, raw and disproportionate, should have served as a stark warning, a crimson flag waving against the clear blue sky of their burgeoning relationship. Friends, witnessing the uncomfortable scene, exchanged worried glances. But Elara, her heart already entwined with Mateo's, perhaps dismissed it as a momentary lapse, an overzealous expression of his affection. Love, in its initial intoxicating phase, often has the unfortunate ability to blind us to the very signs that could foreshadow future storms. The tension that momentarily hung in the air eventually dissipated, smoothed over by Mateo's subsequent apologies and Elara's own willingness to forgive. The wedding plans, once temporarily clouded, moved forward, propelled by Elara's deep affection and Mateo's carefully crafted remorse. December arrived, bringing with it the promise of a new life together, a life built on a foundation that already contained a hairline crack, a fissure born of unchecked jealousy. Little did Elara know that this seemingly minor incident was not an isolated event, but the first chilling whisper of a dark mist that would eventually consume their shared world. But little did Elara realize then that this was not merely a fleeting outburst of emotion. It was a harbinger, a subtle yet ominous prelude to a symphony of control and possessiveness that would gradually envelop her life, casting long, suffocating shadows over the bright future she had so eagerly envisioned. And so, their path towards matrimony continued, seemingly unburdened by this early discord. Yet, the seed of Mateo's jealousy had been sown, a tiny root taking hold in the fertile ground of their relationship, waiting for the right conditions to sprout and eventually choke the very life out of their bond. The hairline crack in their foundation, born from Mateo's unsettling reaction in the marketplace, widened ever so slightly in the days that followed. What Elara had initially tried to rationalize as an overabundance of affection began to reveal its true, more sinister nature. It wasn't love that fueled Mateo's outburst, it was a deep-seated possessiveness, a need to control every aspect of Elara's interactions, as if she were an object to be guarded rather than a partner to be cherished. Their wedding day arrived, a vibrant celebration under the warm Colombian sun. Elara, radiant in her white dress, hoped that the vows exchanged would solidify their bond and perhaps even quell the unease that occasionally flickered within her. Mateo, standing tall and seemingly devoted at the altar, made promises that echoed through the small church. But even amidst the joyous occasion, a subtle tension lingered, an unspoken undercurrent that only Elara seemed acutely aware of. The initial months of their marriage unfolded with a semblance of normalcy. They established a small household in Pitalito, a cozy space filled with Elara's personal touches. Mateo worked sporadically, his contributions to the household finances inconsistent at best. Elara, with her bright spirit and industrious nature, took on various jobs, from assisting at the local mercado to a brief stint at a small clothing store. She poured her energy into making their house a home, nurturing the budding dreams they had once shared. However, the insidious tendrils of Mateo's jealousy began to tighten their grip. His initial discomfort with Elara's interactions with others morphed into outright suspicion and control. He questioned her about every conversation, scrutinized her friendships, and expressed displeasure even at casual greetings exchanged in the street. The memory of the kiss on the cheek seemed to fester within him, a constant source of resentment that colored his perception of Elara's every move. One afternoon, Elara excitedly shared news of a potential job opportunity at a furniture store, a position that offered better pay and more stable hours. Instead of celebrating her ambition, Mateo's reaction was cold and dismissive. He voiced concerns about her working alongside other men, his tone laced with an unfounded suspicion that stung Elara deeply. The joy of the potential opportunity withered under the weight of his distrust. The restrictions on Elara's life gradually intensified. Mateo began to dictate what she could wear, expressing disapproval if he deemed her attire too revealing or if she wore even a touch of makeup. He seemed to view any attention she might receive from others as a personal affront, a challenge to his ownership. Her once vibrant wardrobe slowly transformed into a collection of more subdued and less attention-drawing clothes, a silent testament to the erosion of her autonomy. The control extended beyond her appearance and social interactions. Mateo became increasingly possessive of her time, expressing displeasure if she spent too long talking to neighbors or visiting her family in La Plata. The once frequent calls to her sister, Sofia, became less and less frequent, curtailed by Mateo's subtle but persistent disapproval. Elara found herself increasingly isolated, the warmth of her extended family and friends slowly receding as Mateo tightened his hold. One particularly difficult period arose when Elara secured a job at a local supermarket through the help of a distant relative. The work was demanding, but the steady income provided a much-needed financial stability for their growing family. For 3 years, Elara dedicated herself to the job, balancing her work with her household responsibilities. Yet, Mateo's jealousy cast a dark shadow over this period as well. He would often call her at work, his voice laced with suspicion, demanding to know her whereabouts and with whom she was speaking. He would scrutinize her paychecks, questioning every expense, despite his own inconsistent financial contributions. The constant accusations and the underlying tension created a pervasive atmosphere of anxiety in their home. Sofia, sensing her sister's growing distress during their increasingly infrequent phone calls, urged Elara to leave. "He's controlling you, Elara," she pleaded one evening, her voice filled with concern. "This isn't right. This isn't love." But Elara, bound by a complex web of affection, fear, and a sense of obligation, found it difficult to envision a life outside of her marriage. The arrival of their first daughter in 1999, followed by 2 more daughters in the subsequent years, further complicated her situation. Her children became both a source of immense joy and a reason to endure, a fragile shield against the growing darkness in her life. She clung to the hope that Mateo's behavior would improve, that the man she had fallen in love with still existed beneath the layers of jealousy and control. However, Mateo's possessiveness showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to intensify with each passing year, fueled by his own insecurities and a distorted view of their relationship. He saw Elara's every independent action, every interaction outside their immediate family, as a potential act of betrayal. The simple act of going to work, of wanting to contribute to their family's well-being, was twisted in his mind into something suspicious, something that needed to be monitored and controlled. The walls of their home, once a sanctuary, began to feel like the walls of a prison, slowly closing in on Elara's spirit. The laughter that had once echoed through its rooms became increasingly rare, replaced by a strange silence punctuated by Mateo's accusations and Elara's weary sighs. The vibrant dreams she had carried within her began to dim, overshadowed by the encroaching darkness of Mateo's possessive love. And as the years passed, the initial kiss on the cheek, an innocent greeting, transformed in Elara's memory into a bitter symbol, the first drop in a cup that would eventually overflow with tears and ultimately, with blood. The warmth of Pitalito's sun seemed to offer little comfort against the chilling grip of Mateo's jealousy, a coldness that seeped into the very heart of their home. The air in their small Pitalito home, once filled with the hopeful melodies of a young couple building a life, thickened with an unspoken tension, a silent scream trapped within the walls. Elara moved through her days with a growing sense of unease, the vibrant colors of her dreams fading to muted grays under the oppressive weight of Mateo's control. The very act of existing within the confines of their shared space became a tightrope walk, each word and action meticulously considered to avoid triggering his volatile jealousy. The boundaries of Elara's world continued to shrink, defined by Mateo's increasingly stringent rules. Even the simple pleasure of tending to the small garden outside their home became subject to his scrutiny. He would watch her from the window, his gaze unwavering, questioning her about any neighbor who might have paused for a brief conversation. The warmth of the sun on her skin felt less comforting under his suspicious eyes, the vibrant bloom seeming to mock the wilting of her own spirit. The phone calls to her family in La Plata, once a source of comfort and connection, transformed into furtive whispers. Mateo's presence during these calls was palpable, even when he wasn't speaking, his heavy silence a more potent form of censorship than any direct command. Elara would clutch the receiver, her voice tight with anxiety, carefully choosing her words, omitting details that might provoke his anger. Sophia's increasingly frantic pleas for her sister to escape echoed in Elara's ears long after the call ended, seeds of doubt struggling to take root in the parched soil of her fear. Mateo's financial control tightened its grip, a constant reminder of Elara's dependence. While she tirelessly sought work and managed their meager resources, his own contributions remained sporadic and unreliable. Yet, he wielded his limited financial input like a weapon, demanding detailed accounting of every peso Elara spent, fostering a climate of distrust and resentment. The irony was a bitter pill. The one who labored the most was treated like a child with an allowance, her hard-earned income subject to the whims of the one who contributed the least. His jealousy, a venomous vine, snaked its way through every aspect of Elara's life, choking the joy out of even the simplest acts. The innocent pleasure she once found in choosing her clothes or applying a touch of makeup became a source of dread. Mateo's accusations, sharp and cruel, would pierce through her carefully constructed composure, leaving her feeling exposed and ashamed. Her reflection in the mirror became a battleground, each outfit and every trace of color on her face weighed against the potential for his wrath. Slowly, the vibrant hues of her personal expression were leached away, replaced by a drab uniformity dictated by Mateo's insecurities. The job at the supermarket, initially a symbol of her resilience and determination, ultimately became a symbol of her subjugation. The constant phone calls from Mateo during her shifts were a relentless intrusion, each ring a reminder of his distrust. His accusations of infidelity, hurled across the telephone line, created a suffocating atmosphere of suspicion that poisoned her interactions with colleagues and eroded her sense of professional pride. The vibrant energy she once brought to her work was slowly extinguished, replaced by a weary resignation. The day Mateo issued his ultimatum, her job or his peace, felt like a final severing of her ties to the outside world. Trapped between the needs of her daughters and the suffocating demands of her husband, Elara made the heartbreaking choice to resign. The loss of her financial independence was a profound blow, deepening her isolation and fueling a gnawing despair that threatened to consume her entirely. The walls of their Pitalito home, once envisioned as a haven for their family, now stood as the stark boundaries of her confinement, locking her away from her aspirations and the solace of her loved ones. In the hushed secrecy of her carefully monitored phone calls, Elara's voice grew increasingly faint, laced with a fear that had become a constant companion. She spoke of her bone-deep exhaustion, the relentless frustration of Mateo's lack of support, and the suffocating weight of his jealousy. Her words painted a bleak portrait of her existence, a life shrinking with each passing day, defined by isolation, control, and a chilling premonition of a darkness she could no longer ignore. Her family in La Plata listened with growing alarm, their hearts aching with a sense of helplessness, a terrifying premonition of a tragedy looming on the horizon. The bright, spirited Elara they cherished was fading before their ears, her light dimmed by the encroaching shadows of Mateo's possessive love, a darkness that promised to extinguish her flame entirely. The sweet scent of the Pitalito air, once a reminder of new beginnings, now carried a faint, metallic tang, a subtle foreshadowing of the blood that would one day stain the very ground beneath their feet. The invisible bars of Elara's prison, forged by Mateo's escalating control, grew heavier with each passing day in their Pitalito home. The vibrant spirit that once animated her movements now flickered like a candle in a draught, threatened by the suffocating atmosphere of Mateo's possessiveness. The simple joys of life in their small Colombian town, the friendly greetings, the shared laughter with neighbors, had long been extinguished, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that clung to Elara like a second skin. Sunday, August 22, 2010, dawned with a deceptive calm, a fragile truce in the ongoing war for Elara's freedom. A small children's party, a splash of innocent joy in their otherwise constrained lives, offered a brief glimmer of hope. Elara, her heart lightening at the prospect of seeing her daughters' faces light up with laughter, mentioned the invitation to Mateo. The air in the small kitchen, usually filled with the aroma of brewing coffee, instantly chilled. Mateo's refusal was immediate, absolute. "They are not going." "And neither are you," he declared, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. Elara's disappointment was a tangible thing, a heavy weight in her chest. It wasn't just about the party, it was about Mateo's unwavering need to isolate her, to sever any remaining threads connecting her to a life beyond him. The ensuing argument crackled with unspoken resentments, the years of accumulated control and stifled desires hanging heavy in the air. Mateo's jealousy, a festering wound, was easily inflamed. He accused her of wanting to go to the party to meet other men, his words laced with the familiar venom of his insecurity. Despite his explicit prohibition, a flicker of defiance ignited within Elara. The thought of her daughters missing out on a simple celebration, coupled with the suffocating feeling of being constantly confined, spurred her to a quiet act of rebellion. Around 3 in the afternoon, while Mateo was occupied, she slipped out of the house, intending only to briefly explain to a friend why her daughters couldn't attend and perhaps drop off a small gift. The momentary taste of freedom, the simple act of walking unchaperoned through the familiar streets of Pitalito, was bittersweet. It was a reminder of the life that was slowly being stolen from her. But the respite was short-lived. Soon, her phone buzzed with Mateo's insistent call. His voice on the other end was a volatile mix of anger and suspicion. "Where are you?" he demanded, his tone accusatory. Elara, emboldened by her small act of defiance and fueled by years of suppressed frustration, retorted with a rare spark of defiance. "What's wrong with her being scared or what?" Mateo, taken aback by her uncharacteristic response, stammered that he only wanted to know about their daughters. But Elara, her voice rising with a newfound assertiveness, cut him off. "No, you want to know where I am. I'm at a nightclub." And with that, she hung up, the click of the disconnecting call echoing the slamming door of her fleeting rebellion. Mateo's rage on the other end of the line was a palpable force, even miles away. Unable to reach Elara, he did the only thing he could think of. He called her mother in La Plata, his voice a torrent of anger and accusation. He painted a picture of Elara as defiant and unfaithful, twisting the simple act of her stepping out to visit a friend into a scandalous betrayal. Elara's mother, her heart sinking with a familiar dread, tried to calm Mateo, her voice a soothing balm against his fury. She acknowledged the difficulties in their relationship but pleaded with him to leave Elara alone, her intuition screaming that something terrible was brewing. Meanwhile, Elara, having made her point, was not at a nightclub. She was simply at her friend's house, explaining her predicament and arranging for the gift to be sent to the birthday girl. She had no intention of staying out late, her primary concern being the inevitable fallout from her small act of independence. Back in Pitalito, Mateo paced the confines of their home, his anger festering. He locked the girls inside, his possessiveness extending even to their innocent freedom. Witnesses later recalled seeing Elara that Sunday, her face etched with worry and a profound sense of being trapped. She had confided in her mother, her voice filled with desperation, "I am so bored. I don't know what to do. He won't leave me alone, and I'm afraid he could do something to the girls. He always blackmails me with them." That evening, the fragile tension in the house remained palpable. Around 8 o'clock, Elara managed to call her mother again. Her voice was subdued, but there was a hint of relief. She mentioned that they had reached a fragile agreement. Mateo would leave the house. But her mother's relief was tempered with a deep-seated fear. "Daughter, be careful," she urged, her voice laced with worry. "Go legally, talk to family welfare. Be careful because that man seems sick." Mateo, however, was not leaving. His desperation was mounting. He called Elara's mother again, his voice now tinged with a frantic edge. "I don't know what could happen," he mumbled, his words disjointed. "I don't remember anything. I don't remember anything." Later that night, he called his boss, requesting the next day off, claiming he needed to report a domestic issue to family welfare. Elara returned home later that night, the air in the house thick with unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. A tense argument ensued, witnessed only by their 3 young daughters, who huddled together, their small faces reflecting the storm raging around them. Elara, her resolve finally hardening, asked Mateo to leave. When he refused, she called the police, a desperate plea for intervention. But when she tried to leave, Mateo physically prevented her, grabbing her jacket, his grip tight with possessive rage. The scene, witnessed by one of their daughters, was terrifying, leaving the child paralyzed with fear. That night, an uneasy truce settled over the house. They slept in the same room, the silence heavy with unspoken threats and unshed tears. But beneath the fragile calm, the seeds of a terrible rage had been sown, watered by years of control and jealousy. The night air in Pitalito, usually filled with the chirping of crickets, held a pregnant stillness, a silent prelude to the violent storm that was about to break. The tears shed in the darkness were not just tears of frustration and fear, they were the bitter harbingers of a devastating dawn. The fragile peace that had settled over the small house in Pitalito that Sunday night was a mere illusion, a deceptive stillness before the inevitable eruption. Monday morning, August 23, 2010, dawned with a heavy, unspoken tension. The remnants of the previous night's conflict clung to the air like a damp shroud. Elara moved with a quiet resignation, her face pale, but she went through the motions of preparing her daughters for school, a routine that offered a small semblance of normalcy in their increasingly chaotic lives. But Mateo, his mind a tempest of jealousy and resentment, had other plans. He demanded the keys to the motorcycle, intending to take the girls to school himself, disrupting their usual routine, asserting his control in yet another subtle way. Elara initially feigned ignorance, a small act of defiance in the face of his overbearingness. But the glint in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw, warned her against further resistance. She surrendered the keys, the cold metal a stark symbol of her diminishing autonomy. Even this small victory did not appease Mateo's simmering rage. He grumbled about the state of the motorcycle, unleashing a brief torrent of frustration, a thinly veiled display of his inner turmoil. Despite his agitation, he took their 2 eldest daughters to school. As they rode away, the girls remembered him saying something strange, a disquieting reassurance that would later echo in their young minds, "Calm down, nothing is going to happen." This unusual act of paternal care, coupled with his cryptic words, left them with a sense of unease they couldn't quite articulate. Returning home, Elara requested a moment alone with Mateo. She asked him to take their youngest daughter out as well, needing a precious sliver of time to collect her thoughts, to perhaps make a desperate phone call, her fear a tangible presence in the quiet house. Seizing this brief window, Elara rushed to a nearby store, her heart pounding in her chest. She contacted a friend, her voice trembling as she confessed her growing fear, the chilling premonition that something terrible was imminent. Her friend, deeply concerned, called the local police. But when the officers arrived, they found no immediate signs of violence, no concrete reason to intervene in what appeared to be a domestic dispute. They left, unaware of the deadly drama unfolding behind closed doors. Only Mateo and Elara knew the true horror that transpired in the suffocating silence of that August morning. According to Mateo's subsequent account, offered with a carefully constructed air of self-defense, the situation turned volatile the moment he returned from taking the older girls to school. He claimed that Elara verbally attacked him, her words like sharp stones. Then, he alleged, she grabbed a motorcycle helmet, attempting to strike him. The argument, in his telling, escalated rapidly. He claimed Elara then seized his sweatshirt, a prelude to a more violent act. He stated she went to the kitchen and armed herself with a knife. Mateo's narrative painted a picture of Elara as the aggressor, a sudden and unexpected transformation of the woman he had so meticulously controlled. He claimed she lunged at him, the knife a glinting threat, and that he acted purely in self-preservation. He described a struggle, a chaotic flurry of movement, during which he sustained injuries as he desperately tried to fend off her attack. He spoke of a deep wound to his chest, the crimson stain spreading rapidly across his clothes, and a cut on his arm that would later require stitches. But Mateo's version of events was riddled with inconsistencies, a flimsy fabric of lies woven to obscure the brutal truth. The crime scene itself told a different story. The disarray in the house spoke not of a desperate struggle for survival, but of a violent assault. Bloodstains were found not just in one area, as might be expected in a mutual fight, but scattered throughout the house, indicating movement and a sustained attack. Elara's body, discovered face down, bore the marks of extreme violence, 4 stab wounds, 3 in the chest and 1 in the neck, each telling a silent tale of a life brutally extinguished. The authorities noted the superficial nature of Mateo's injuries, their clean edges suggesting they were self-inflicted or sustained in a manner inconsistent with a life-threatening attack. The timeline he provided also raised suspicion. If he had been so grievously wounded in the morning, as he claimed, how had he managed to remain at large for hours before finally turning himself in? Furthermore, Mateo's actions after the murder spoke volumes. He had changed his bloodied clothes, a clear attempt to conceal his involvement. He had drunk water, perhaps to wash away the physical evidence of his crime. He had even smashed Elara's cell phone, a desperate act to silence her voice, to prevent any record of her pleas for help from reaching the outside world. These were not the actions of a man acting in panicked self-defense, they were the calculated moves of someone trying to erase their culpability. The note he left at the scene, a callous attempt to deflect responsibility, take care of the girls. I didn't mean things that way, rang hollow against the backdrop of his violent actions. It was a final, manipulative gesture, a pathetic attempt to portray himself as a remorseful, albeit accidental, killer. The authorities, examining the evidence and Mateo's contradictory statements, saw not a man defending himself, but a jealous and controlling husband finally unleashing the full force of his rage. The lethal weapon that had been slowly forged in the crucible of his possessiveness had finally struck, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable violence and a family shattered beyond repair. The mask of self-defense was a flimsy disguise, unable to conceal the cold-blooded reality of a brutal murder. The silence in the small house in Pitalito that morning was not just the absence of Elara's voice, it was the deafening echo of a life violently stolen, a stark testament to the destructive power of unchecked jealousy. What would the investigators uncover next as they pieced together the fragments of this tragic event? The courtroom in Pitalito, usually a place where the scales of justice were met to balance, felt palpably tilted. Elara's sisters, their faces etched with a grief so profound it seemed to physically weigh them down, sat through each agonizing session. They listened to Mateo's carefully constructed lies, his voice dripping with a false sorrow that grated against their raw wounds. They saw the subtle nods of understanding from his lawyer, the seemingly sympathetic glances exchanged with the judge, each gesture a tiny pinprick of fresh pain. Their own lawyer, Rafael Calderon Ortiz, fought tirelessly, presenting forensic evidence that contradicted Mateo's account, highlighting the inconsistencies in his timeline, and emphasizing the history of abuse Elara had endured. He painted a picture of a controlling man whose jealousy had festered for years, culminating not in a moment of passionate rage, but in a calculated act of ultimate dominance. He spoke of Elara's dreams, her aspirations for her daughters, her quiet ambition to open a small bakery, all extinguished by Mateo's possessiveness. But it felt as though their pleas were falling on deaf ears. The defense painted Elara as volatile, as someone who could provoke such a violent reaction. They subtly shifted the blame, suggesting that Mateo was a victim of circumstance, a man pushed to his breaking point. The concept of legitimate defense of honor, though legally outdated in many jurisdictions, seemed to subtly permeate the atmosphere of the trial, an unspoken justification for Mateo's actions in the eyes of some. The verdict felt like a physical blow to Elara's family, a confirmation of their deepest fears. The reduction of the charge from aggravated homicide to simple homicide felt like a dismissal of the brutality of Elara's final moments, a devaluation of her life. And the granting of house arrest, the image of Mateo confined to the very walls where he had murdered Elara, perhaps even sleeping in the same bed, while her daughters were left without their mother, was an unbearable injustice. The news spread through Pitalito like wildfire, igniting a blaze of public outrage. Neighbors who had witnessed Mateo's controlling behavior, friends who had listened to Elara's tearful confessions of fear, and even strangers who simply believed in fundamental fairness took to the streets. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, the air thick with angry chants and demands for a retrial. Social media platforms became a battleground, with hashtags demanding justice for Elara trending nationwide. The case became a symbol of the perceived failures of the Colombian legal system, a stark example of how societal biases and legal loopholes could seemingly protect perpetrators of domestic violence. The collective voice of the community, raw with grief and a sense of profound injustice, echoed Elara's family's anguished cry, "Where is the justice?" The question hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud over the small town of Pitalito, casting a long shadow over the already tragic fate of a young woman with so many dreams left unfulfilled. What steps could be taken to challenge this deeply unpopular verdict, and could the weight of public opinion truly influence the cold machinery of the law? The burning question of justice in Pitalito echoed far beyond the courtroom walls, a desperate cry that resonated with the grim realities of domestic violence plaguing communities, big and small, across the globe. Elara's story, tragically unique in its specifics, was but one thread in a larger, sorrowful tapestry woven with fear, control, and the devastating consequences of unchecked rage. In close-knit communities like Pitalito, where everyone knows everyone, the insidious nature of domestic abuse can often be hidden behind closed doors, masked by a veneer of normalcy until the breaking point. Neighbors might have heard raised voices, family members might have noticed subtle signs of distress, but often, a culture of silence, a reluctance to interfere in private matters, allows the cycle of violence to continue, sometimes with fatal consequences. Elara, vibrant and full of the promise of youth, represented so many women whose dreams are slowly eroded by the possessiveness and insecurity of their partners. Her aspirations, like fragile seedlings, withered under the shadow of Mateo's jealousy. The foreshadowing of tragedy was there, in the early instances of his controlling behavior, the outbursts of anger over a simple kiss, warnings that, in the hopeful blindness of love, were often dismissed or minimized. "He's just protective," she might have thought, or "it was just a moment of anger, he didn't mean it." But these small cracks in the foundation of their relationship widened over time, eventually leading to a catastrophic collapse. The impact of such violence reverberates through generations, leaving indelible scars, particularly on the children who witness it. Elara's daughters, robbed of their mother in such a brutal way, were also forced to confront the horrifying reality of their father's capacity for violence. The psychological trauma of witnessing conflict, of living in a home filled with tension and fear, and then the ultimate loss of a parent at the hands of the other, creates wounds that may never fully heal. What support systems would be in place for these young girls, and how would they navigate a future irrevocably altered by such profound loss and betrayal? The outcry from Pitalito served as a stark reminder of the urgent need for societal change. It begged the question, what is the responsibility of the community, of extended family, of friends, to intervene when they suspect domestic abuse? Are there enough resources, enough safe havens, for victims to turn to before it's too late? The perceived failures of the legal system in Elara's case amplified the sense of helplessness felt by many victims and advocates, highlighting the loopholes and biases that can allow perpetrators to escape the full consequences of their actions. This tragedy underscored the critical need for a shift in societal attitudes, a dismantling of the silence that often surrounds domestic violence, and a strengthening of the systems designed to protect the vulnerable. The echoes of Elara's story from Pitalito demanded a deeper examination of how love can twist into something so dark, and what collective action is necessary to bring light and safety to those living in its shadow. What lasting lessons could be learned from this devastating case, and how could they be translated into tangible changes in policy and community support? The cry for justice that echoed from Pitalito, a lament for Elara's lost dreams and a condemnation of Mateo's brutal act, forces us to confront a chilling truth: the scars of domestic violence run deep, often invisible until they bleed into tragedy. The story of a young woman full of life, whose path intertwined with a man consumed by the shadows of his own jealousy, culminating in a destiny stained with blood, serves as a stark and painful lesson. It whispers of the subtle ways control can masquerade as love, and how unchecked insecurity can metastasize into lethal rage. Elara's vibrant spirit, once a beacon of hope in her small community in Colombia, was gradually dimmed by the possessiveness that lurked beneath Mateo's charming facade. Those early flickers of jealousy, dismissed as mere quirks of affection, were in reality the ominous clouds gathering before a storm. The bidirectional street where they first met, once a symbol of their blossoming romance, would later become a silent witness to the unraveling of their lives. The dreams they shared, of a family, of a future, were ultimately shattered by the very person who vowed to cherish them. The courtroom, meant to be a sanctuary of truth and fairness, became a stage for a different kind of performance: Mateo's calculated portrayal of remorse, a stark contrast to the cold violence he had inflicted. The legal arguments that hinged on self-defense and a supposed heat of passion felt like a betrayal, a twisting of justice that left Elara's family reeling. The leniency shown, the granting of house arrest, felt like a slap in the face, a devaluation of Elara's life in favor of the comfort of her killer. But the scars left by this tragedy extend far beyond the immediate family. The three daughters, now bearing the unimaginable weight of loss and the horrifying knowledge of their father's actions, will carry these wounds, visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. The community of Pitalito, once a place of familiar comfort, now bears the collective trauma of witnessing such a brutal act within its midst. The unanswered questions linger like a persistent ache. Could this have been prevented? Were there missed signs? What more could have been done? This isn't just a story about Pitalito, Colombia. It's a reflection of a global crisis, the insidious tendrils of domestic violence that reach into homes and communities everywhere. It compels us to examine the role each of us plays, as neighbors, as family members, as members of society, in creating a culture where such violence is not tolerated, where victims are supported, and where the shadows of fear are replaced by the light of safety and justice. How can we ensure that the cries for help, often whispered in fear, are heard before they are silenced forever? The memory of Elara, a young woman whose dreams were extinguished by the very person who promised her love, should serve as a constant reminder of our collective responsibility to ensure that no more scars are left to bleed.